We're live.
Hello and all, and welcome to the only broadcast regularly featuring me, the Mentionables. I, of course, am Joel Furtick.
I'm Caleb Johnston.
And I'm Clinton Wilcox.
On today's episode, do you believe in belief? Are you certain? But first, let's play a round of thumbs up and thumbs down. For anyone who's not familiar, this is a game where we read statements submitted to us by listeners, and then each mentionable gives the statement either a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Ready, gentlemen?
Ready.
Okay, first statement. The Appalachian Mountains are better than the Rocky Mountains. Caleb, what do you think?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Having lived in the Appalachian Mountains my pretty much whole life, yeah, I would say, although I have to say I haven't visited the Rockies. I've heard good things. But for me, it's the Appalachians all the way.
Isn't that kind of like saying you don't like Brussels sprouts even though you've never tasted them before?
It's very close to that, but in this situation, I'm okay with that.
Okay, I'm in a similar situation. I'm from the West Coast. I have never actually laid eyes on the Appalachian Mountains, although I do know how to pronounce it. But I have actually laid eyes on the Rockies because I've been to Colorado several times. So I guess I'll give a thumbs down to that. I'll say the Rockies are better. I'll do that just to counter Caleb's opinion.
So I've seen the Rockies, but I've seen the Appalachians way more than I have the Rockies. I have to say the Rockies, in terms of grandeur and beauty, really put up a good fight. I would say that probably they outstrip the Appalachians in that category. Although there's some really good scenery and views in the Appalachians, very beautiful areas. Caleb, Clinton, you were about to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, but we all know that the Sierra Nevadas outstrip them all.
Well, at any rate.
Actually, I'm just joking. I think the Rockies probably even have the Sierra Nevadas beat.
So, I mean...
But the people in the Appalachians, you can't...
Well, I haven't finished my statement yet.
Oh, okay.
Relax. All right. Scenery aside, when I sit down and I think about the pros and cons of Appalachians versus Rockies, the Appalachians are way easier to hike than the Rockies, and there is in fact a trail that you can hike that would take you essentially all the way up the East Coast, the Appalachian Trail, which is I've been on bits of it. I haven't hiked the whole thing, probably never will, but that's a summer trip for some people. They start down in Georgia at the beginning of the summer, and they get picked up in Maine or something at the end, having hiked the entire thing. And then, of course, as Caleb mentioned, there's kind of a culture that surrounds the Appalachians. Now, that culture may not be for everyone, but it has its charms. So, in terms of scenery, Appalachians have a good deal of that and a good variety of that. They have more accessibility than the Rockies, and they've got a culture that is kind of charming. So I'm probably going to give a thumbs up to that.
Yeah.
There we go.
I
have been outvoted.
Yeah.
Sorry to all my Colorado friends. What's that?
You haven't seen the Appalachians, so.
That's true. That is true.
That's unfair.
Yeah, I have been to the East Coast, but I don't think I've been to the Appalachian Mountains that I can recall. So.
Yeah, it's a thing.
Well, the trail is about 15 minutes from my house, or at least a big portion of it. So next time you're out this way, if you visit down here, we'll take you out and make you a believer.
All right. Sounds good.
So second statement, Pepsi is way better than Coke.
Oh, that's a definite thumbs down from me here.
Okay. Yep.
There we go. Let me get it in frame.
I'm gonna second that.
So it's interesting. If you recall any kind of mention of the Pepsi challenge, which took place in I think the 80s or something like that, basically they would have a person blind taste test Coke and Pepsi and choose which one they preferred. And when the labels were on them, people preferred Coke. But when the labels were off, people preferred Pepsi. And that was the whole deal. That's why New Coke came along, because, after the Pepsi challenge, marketed Pepsi so successfully that people preferred it in a blind taste test. Coke tried to kind of mimic the Pepsi taste to, see if they can get both the branding results and the taste results. Of course, that was a spectacular failure. So, yeah, in terms of pure palatability, Pepsi has kind of an advantage, but the Coke name brand really sells them so that people just prefer it if it's labeled.
Yeah, so chances are, if you would have just given us a couple of cups of Pepsi and Coke, we would have given a thumbs up instead.
Well, having said all of that, I find
here
Pepsi
he goes
to be,
again.
I found Pepsi to be too sweet. Even trying to be fair about this, taking branding aside.
Yeah, Coke always tastes sweeter to me than Pepsi.
All right. Well, Pepsi is sweeter. But at any rate, yeah, I prefer Coke, so I'm going to give that one a thumbs down.
All right. Joel is very nuanced tonight.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've got a couple of people who didn't understand the nature of thumbs up and thumbs down. And when I say a couple, I mean one person that submitted two
Mr. Tyler Vela
statements. All right, so these are either ors.
Yeah, he could take my logic class. We teach what statements are in Intro to Logic.
Yeah.
I'm joking. Tyler's a really smart guy. I'm joking about that. Just in case he's listening in.
Tyler actually does listen to the show.
Okay.
Which is weird to me.
Right. Well,
I don't know when that started, but
yeah,
he pops in every once in a while and corrects us.
Yeah, I'll give a listen if I didn't appear on it. If I did appear on it, I'm like, I already heard everything. So, yeah.
I have to listen to it about 3 times. Because, I'm on it, and then I edit it, and then I actually listen to it when it releases.
Right.
But that's probably more my concern with quality control. Speaking of which, Clinton, do you have to appear so?
Do I have to what?
Appear so much?
Oh, okay.
I kid.
Right, okay. Yeah, I'm surprised you left me in at all.
All right, so either ors, hamburger or taco?
I'm going to give a thumbs up to both there.
Thumbs up to
all right, that's fair.
Yeah, I like both hamburgers and tacos, but I don't like them equally. I'm going to say hamburgers edge out tacos to me.
Well, I'll tell you what.
So hamburgers are better than tacos. Thumbs up.
I would second that.
I love tacos when I make them from a taco kit at home. For whatever reason, when I get them at restaurants, they're never as good as the ones that I make at home from the taco kit.
Well, it's because you don't live as close to Mexico as I do. You could get good quality tacos from the restaurants here. Yeah,
I don't know. But it's rare that I meet a hamburger I don't like. So, having said that, I'm going to go with hamburgers.
Do you have a Whataburger out there?
No.
In your neck of the woods? No? Okay. Because we don't have them out here, but I have tried them because I've been in states that have Whataburgers, and I don't get the appeal. So many people on social media just like rave over Whataburger and make irrational statements like Whataburger is better than In-N-Out. That doesn't make any sense.
Never eaten either. I've only recently tried Five Guys.
Okay, yeah,
that's a good burger.
We have Five Guys out here. They're good, but overpriced for what they are. I would eat them more. So true. I'd eat them more if their burgers were cheaper.
In terms of burger joints, I'd have to say the one that sticks out to me is Red Robin.
My sister is addicted to Red Robin.
Yeah.
So yeah.
All right. So final statement. Sneakers or sandals?
You said sneakers, right?
Sneakers or sandals?
I heard Snickers, and I'm thinking, what? Those don't compare. Yeah, I'm going sandals.
Okay.
I mean, no, slippers. I know.
Neither, right?
Sneakers. Sneakers is what I meant to say. I'm a sneakers guy. I don't like sandals.
Okay.
See, I mean, it depends on the time of the year. I mean,
Sure.
Can I just say Merrell's? Because both my sneakers and my sandals are Merrell's, so I'll give a thumbs up to Merrell's.
Sure.
Merrell's would be a shoe manufacturer?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Merrell's, however you pronounce it.
Okay. I usually just get mine from Target.
Yeah, so I'm going to go with sneakers because they're kind of all-terrain and sandals aren't. And they seem more versatile than sandals. I mean, the advantage of sandals is they're comfortable during warm weather or on certain terrain. So comfort-wise.
Yeah, and if you ever get chased by a bear, you definitely want to be in sneakers.
Right. But you can get breathable sneakers, like running sneakers, that are better. And, I don't know. I like sneakers because they allow me to run on a moment's notice.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah, see, I'm really not used to calling them sneakers. I call them tennis shoes, and that's what I'm used to, referring to.
Yeah, which is weird because the person that submitted this statement also lives in California.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So you'd think if it was a regional thing, he would have said tennis shoes as well.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, and Nick, your virgin birth joke only plays so many times. Stop submitting it.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that Nick affirms the virgin birth.
Yeah, we've already done that, though.
Probably, yeah.
Just for bringing it up, we're going to probably hear it another 5 or 10 times.
Probably, yeah.
Probably.
Yeah,
I could make good money betting on that.
Yeah, I have to be careful what I say on Facebook because Nick is the kind of person who will never lets an opportunity pass for a joke.
True, but he also doesn't listen to this, like, at all.
Oh, he doesn't? No. Okay, well, then we're safe.
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, on to the content.
All right.
So not long ago, I found my dad's old college dictionary from 1981, and this would be the new Webster's Dictionary edition. And
Not
just
very
for
new
fun,
anymore.
What's that?
Not very new anymore.
Nope. Just for fun, I wanted to see what the definition of atheism and how it had changed in the last 40 years. So the 81 Webster's Dictionary defined atheism as, quote, the disbelief in the existence of a God or supreme being. All right, pretty straightforward. Or it would seem pretty straightforward, but it isn't. That's what we're here to talk about.
I'm fairly certain because I have the new pocket Oxford American Dictionary, and I'm almost positive it has the same definition for atheism.
Well, I looked it up in the new Merriam-Webster dictionary online, and they'd modified the definition. I mean, Merriam-Webster is the carrying on the tradition of the Webster at any rate.
Right.
And they tagged something onto the front of that, and it was a lack of belief or a strong disbelief in the existence of God or gods. So they kept the strong disbelief part, but they preceded it by a lack of belief. Now, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, from what I understand about how dictionaries work, is that they don't necessarily define words so much as track how the words are used in common language. So it's not that the dictionary one day just decided to define it as a lack of belief, but since so many people have started using it in that way, then the dictionary would start defining it in that way.
Yeah.
That's at least what I heard. I don't know if that's 100% accurate, but
no, it is. That's exactly the job of the dictionary, is to define how things are being used in society at that time. That way, if I hear jargon that I don't understand, I can look it up in the dictionary and see what was meant when it was used, in modern times. So yeah, you're right. I mean, it's not that word has, changed definition or that the dictionary got it wrong. They were just giving the current definition. But the question is, why has that changed culturally, and what does that mean? So if you try with online atheism to the degree that we do, you'll be aware that there's a stress being placed on the idea that atheism is, in fact, a lack of belief in God. But what does that mean? To understand that, you have to understand what is being meant here by belief and by disbelief. So as a kid, one of my favorite authors was Douglas Adams. Anybody else a Douglas Adams fan?
Yeah, I have the entire Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy collection on my bookshelf.
Yeah, I had it in one solid volume, and then I was looking for it the other day, and I can't find it anywhere. So,
I can grab mine if you want me to.
Yeah, it's not necessary. I bring it up because he also wrote a series of stories called, I want to say it was Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency or something like that. That ring any bells?
No, never heard of that.
All right, so basically, it was a continuation of this idea of comedy writing, but in this case, it was comedy writing in the genre of detective novel. And so you had this sort of eccentric detective character, and then he got wrapped up in kind of the ethereal nonsense that you see in Hitchhiker's Guide, but more of the earthly version of that. The idea, getting tossed around and really weird, random things that occur, and
yeah. So did that book series have kind of an atheistic bent like the Hitchhiker's Guide does, or?
Well, I mean, Douglas Adams was famously an atheist. In fact, he was a friend of Richard Dawkins prior to his death, and he was the one that created the puddle, not dilemma. What do you call that?
Analogy.
Yeah, puddle analogy. Let's call it that. But at any rate, in this particular, in one of the books in the series has 2.5 books in it. The one that's 1/2 book he was writing before he died, so
Oh, so this was written late in his life then.
The Dirk Gently, I think the first one he wrote in the 80s.
Okay.
And then he wrote a second one, I don't know, probably late 80s, 90s. And then the last one he was working on, and the way Douglas Adams worked is he'd write a little bit of something and then leave it on the shelf for about 10 years.
with some of my projects, that's kind of how I work too.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's most creative people. And he was definitely that. So what in the publication I have called The Salmon of Doubt, they have what he had finished of that story so far, and then it just kind of threw in a bunch of other random things they'd found sitting on his shelf that had never gotten published, and they put it all in one volume. And it's interesting, but in one of the books in the series, there's this character that's introduced, and the character is an electric monk. And I think it's on some other planet. And in the scene where the monk is introduced, we're told that the job of an electric monk is to believe. And at the point he's introduced, he's busy believing that with all his might, that the landscape is pink. And so he's just kind of sitting there really hard, believing it really hard. And as a kid, I didn't really get what the joke was there. I knew it was supposed to be funny, but it didn't resonate with me at all. And I had to kind of shrug it off because I didn't get what he was trying to say. Much more recently, only a few years ago, I was hearing a debate on the Unbelievable podcast. And the atheist in the debate had self-published a book titled Godbuster. And he wasn't a particularly articulate atheist, but one of the things he spouted off during the show was, "Oh, let's start believing there isn't any gravity. Look, we're floating around the room." Now, I've always thought of belief as meaning some idea that you hold to be true. So I hold it to be true that I'm on a, live internet broadcast right now. Therefore, I believe that this is what we're doing, right? Or, I believe that I had cereal for breakfast this morning because that's what I remember having. I hold this to be true, therefore I believe it. If you're a trustworthy person and you tell me, you had toast this morning, I would tend to believe you because I trust you. to be telling me the truth.
Right.
But in the atheist mind, the word believe has recently become entangled with the idea of make believe or pretend. So under this definition, beliefs are almost untrue by definition. All right. So what about breakfast? I'm pretty sure I had cereal for breakfast, but if I say I believe I had cereal, I just say I pretend I had cereal. So, I mean, the dilemma here, to me at least, is how would I communicate that, I actually had cereal for breakfast? I can't say I believe I had cereal, because at that point, I'm saying I just pretend I had cereal. So the replacement for that would be I know I had cereal. I don't believe it. I know it.
Well, I don't think we necessarily need to make a dichotomy between knowledge and belief, because philosophers, a number of philosophers, tend to think of knowledge as justified true belief. And so in order to know something, you have to first believe it. So I don't think there really is a dichotomy between belief and knowledge. I know that, the earth revolves around the sun, but I also believe it. If I didn't believe it, then I wouldn't know it, because I believe something else. So, I'm not convinced that it's really helpful to make a distinction between knowledge and belief. I mean, there's a distinction per se, but, making like a dichotomy, like they're mutually exclusive or something.
Well, I don't buy that myself. I'm in the same camp as you. I don't think that it's helpful to, take belief and shove it right into the area of pretend or make believe. Like the electronic monk, he was believing, which meant that he was pretending, and he was trying to make his pretense, actual in his mind.
Right. And now, of course, the question is, do electric monks dream of electric sheep?
No doubt. Right. Yeah, I get it.
Okay. Yeah. Any Philip K. Dick fans here?
I've never read anything, but I'm familiar with the title.
Yeah. Sorry, I'll show myself out.
I actually read one of his short stories. That's the only thing from him I've ever read.
Okay.
I think it was the story that was the inspiration for Screamers, the movie. But anyway, my point is, this is from an atheist perspective. If I ask an atheist says that belief is just pretend, and I say, well, do you believe that? Their response would have to be, no, I know it, because they can't believe it under their definition of belief.
Right, right.
So, and this is sort of the essence of the skeptical mindset. You either know a thing or you don't know a thing, and with no options in between. If I tell you there's a teapot in orbit around Mars, you don't now know this to be true. In order to know it, you would need to have more than just my say-so. You would have to have evidence. So after I put that idea in your head, you hold it in reserve in the skeptic bin until such a time as there is convincing evidence to support the claim. So when a person says they believe in God, the skeptic hears, I'm pretending there is a God. But for a skeptic to say, I disbelieve in God, it's tantamount to saying, I'm pretending there isn't a God. And atheists don't play pretend, so they lack belief.
Yeah, that seems a little uncharitable, though, because when someone tells an atheist, I believe in God, assuming they're not lying or playing make-believe, they really do believe there's a God. And so if there is a God, then they know that there's a God. And if there's not a God, then they're still not pretending they know there's a God. They're just wrong about knowing there's a God. So it's a little uncharitable.
There's the rub, because if I say I believe there's a God, then the atheist would not say that I know there's a God. They would say that I was holding in my mind that it was true that there was a God without actual evidence to support that. You don't know a thing until you have evidence to support that thing. And if I say, well, I've got XYZ evidence, call it the teleological evidence or moral evidence or historical Jesus evidence or anything like that, they can say, well, that's not evidence, and therefore you don't know that there's a God. You believe it.
Or
which is this idea of holding something to be true without actual evidence that it is true.
Yeah, Nick Peters recently expounded the argument from Final Fantasy VII remake.
Go ahead and give us that argument. I'm sure it's convincing.
Oh, just Final Fantasy VII remake came out, therefore there is a God.
Yeah, okay.
QED.
I see it. It's funny. Little story about that. When Final Fantasy VII was first out, my friends and I would sit around, and one of my friends would play it, and we'd all watch. And he was kind of obsessed with it, and then we started to write, a comedic little story that included us all. And at one point in the story, one of the characters said something to the effect of, Final Fantasy VII will still be popular by the time Billy Graham is dead. And so, upon his death, I was like, wait, hold on. Is Final Fantasy VII still popular? I'm a prophet.
Right. Oh yeah. It's actually Final Fantasy VII was the first Final Fantasy I'd ever played. I grew up in the days, actually I was pre NES. I was actually born in 1981. And so we had, Atari, and then NES came out, and I was familiar with, the Mario Brothers. I played Legend of Zelda, which is my first RPG. Never, for whatever reason, I played Mega Man. That was one of my favorite titles, but never, for whatever reason, came across Final Fantasy until the days of the PlayStation, when a friend of mine owned the game, and I watched him play it, and then I picked up my own copy.
Yeah, I think that Final Fantasy VII was most people's introduction to Final Fantasy.
Yeah, a good number of people.
Yeah, so...
Yeah, maybe most. I don't know if there's ever been any studies on that, but yeah.
Yeah. So at any rate, the claim is that God remains in their, don't know bucket until someone gives them convincing evidence. And this is why you frequently hear atheists end the discussion with, I'm not convinced, because, it's the job of the theist to convince them, and therefore move God from the don't know bucket into the knowledge bucket. And as long as they are not convinced, then they have no beliefs regarding the existence of God. They lack belief.
Yeah, then they can just play the hyper skeptic and just keep saying, well, I'm not convinced until the cows come home.
Yeah, the I'm not convinced didn't ever seem like a real rejoinder, because that isn't evidence against God. It's, right. It makes a statement about, a biographical statement about your mindset.
Right. Yeah. If I'm wrong about God, I have no reason to reject my God belief unless you have, positive evidence for atheism.
Yeah. Or, you can defeat the evidence I have to present. Yeah.
Well, even in that case, if they defeat your evidence, that doesn't mean you're wrong, because you can hold to a true conclusion even if you have bad premises. So, I could just believe in God because I had an experience I can't explain when I was younger. So I still would have no reason to reject it unless they can give me some good reasons for why God doesn't exist. If they just say, I'm not convinced, well, okay, good for you. I am convinced. So where did that leave us?
Yeah, and this is kind of ties generally into the genetic fallacy. My belief in God may have arisen from unreliable sources, but that doesn't make it a false belief.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, Alvin Plantinga, I believe, talks about this, that, if God exists, he could use any method to bring someone to knowledge of Christ. Someone had a bad upbringing and desperately desires a father figure, and they accept religion because of that reason. Well, God has given us the, what he calls the sensus divinitatis, the sense of the divine in us. And so that might be what he's using to draw someone to him. So yeah, the genetic fallacy could be at play there. Yeah.
So, but to be an atheist, I would assume that you'd have to say, I lack belief, full stop, period. Because if belief just means, kind of pretending something until you're convinced of it without evidence, and this is what it comes down to. Faith has kind of come to mean that I hold something to be true, but I have no evidence of that. And then belief has just become the, a synonym to faith. Yeah. But
so Caleb on fire with the memes tonight.
Thank you, Caleb.
You bet. You bet. Our viewers should have a little additional content versus just looking at our faces all the time.
Right.
Yeah, who wants that?
Yeah, it's interesting to me that people have went to such lengths to distant belief from truth in any sense. So, to me, belief and truth are not synonymous with one another, but they do interact with one another. So, you can have a belief that's true, or you can have a belief that's false. Just because you believe it does not make it true.
Sure.
And it does not make it false. I'm sure all of us have some beliefs that are true and some beliefs that are false, because usually we discover some of those false beliefs along the way through life. You may not believe that a hot stove will hurt you, but you find that out at some point.
Yeah, so I mean, this idea of knowledge, your options are knowledge, meaning that you actually hold something to be true, that's true, or belief, which means that you're pretending, essentially. It leaves most things in the skeptic bin, I would assume, because there's sort of a implied certainty that comes with knowledge that seems like a high bar to hit.
Yeah, I wonder if they might say the same thing about leprechauns or unicorns. Like they don't disbelieve in unicorns or leprechauns, they just lack a belief in leprechauns or unicorns. Because if you can't prove it to God, I don't see how you could prove there are no unicorns or leprechauns.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question, because you'd have to hold in reserve the possibility that you're wrong about the existence of leprechauns and unicorns.
Right.
But I think that I can be I think that I'm on the right grounds to say that I believe there are no leprechauns or unicorns. And I could give various reasons for why I believe that.
Yeah.
But, I think that I suppose that God is a larger question, at the very least socially. You don't have to interact with too many people that believe in leprechauns all the time, so it's not a live argument.
Yeah, even then, I don't simply lack a belief in the Greek and Roman pantheon of gods. I have a positive belief that they don't exist.
Yeah.
But I also think I have a good reason to believe that.
Right.
I don't take seriously the claim that we're all atheists. They just go one God further than me. Well, no, I believe in Yahweh, and my belief in Yahweh by necessity means that there are no other gods, because God is omnipotent, and so there could be no other omnipotent beings, and any being that's not omnipotent could not properly be called God. So, yeah, so I don't simply lack a belief in other gods. I have a positive belief that those gods don't exist.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it seems like to be a skeptic would have to mean that you'd have to be skeptical about most things, because the level of certainty that comes with the idea of knowledge is, again, a pretty high bar to hit. I mean, you have to always hold in reserve the possibility of solipsism, which would...
Yeah, is it solipsist in here, or is it just me?
Nice.
Sorry.
Solid.
Thanks. Philosophy humor.
Yeah, nice. But yeah, so and therefore this idea of you're a level of certainty that has to be reached in order to hold it to be true. I'm wondering if this isn't a holdover from these deconverts, and I'll explain what I mean. Obviously I've been engaged in the study of deconversion, and I'm happy to announce that I'm finished the profiling and data gathering phase, and I'm now headed into the collating of the data phase, after which I'll be able to speak with a little bit more certainty on the subject. But at any rate, one of the things that I'm running into is that there is this sort of persistent idea that, you know, there has to be a level of certainty associated with being a Christian. And given that that type of certainty isn't possible, you know, this is a contributing factor to some of these deconversion cases. This is not an idea that really rings true with me, and which is strange because, you know, I otherwise share a lot of the background characteristics with most of these converts. I share the kind of profile where I was raised in a Christian family. I was raised in sort of an isolationist setting where I went to a Christian school and all of the people that I knew were Christians. And, you know, I live in the backwoods on a farm, so I didn't have any interaction with a neighborhood or, you know, other individuals who were generally not Christian. And then at least the very first church that I attended for most of my childhood was one of what I'm calling the modal typical churches, which would possibly be more commonly understood as fundamentalist evangelical. And they held to a lot of these ideas that, like, rock music was the work of Satan, and, you know.
Yeah, I definitely don't hold that belief.
Yeah, our last episode kind of
let that cat out of the bag.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, you know, I mean, there was a lot of this performance-based idea, the isolationism, and a lot of these features that I'm seeing with modal typical churches. So yeah, I fit the profile of somebody who might have been a deconvert, and so I can associate or sympathize with a lot of the experiences that I'm seeing in these cases. But the total certainty thing is something I have a difficult time getting my head around. In order to illustrate it, I'll go ahead and read a couple of these quotes that I've harvested from my studies, and hopefully this will give you a better idea of what they're trying to say here. So the first quote that I'm going to read is from Rachel Slick.
Yeah, actually, before I read that, I was actually thinking of her just now because my mind was wandering a little bit, thinking about the deconversion stories that I've heard, and you know, she kind of has the kind of deconversion where it's like, you know, I have all these questions. I asked one person, he couldn't respond, so there must be no answers to these questions, and then ended up leaving the faith, and you know.
Yeah, so this is something that you'll see in a lot of the cases. That's what I would call a trigger. And a trigger is like a primary objection or question that arises and, you know, begins this path of, you know, the buzzword for it is deconstruction, this idea of you go through a period of doubting and then tearing down your faith and eventually deconvert. And so hers was this question of, you know, how, if God is unchanging, then how come morality has changed so drastically from the beginning of the Bible to the end of the Bible? You know, and so that was her trigger, and she went on from there. But I would argue in my model that the trigger is basically an item that gives you permission to begin questioning your faith. I don't think that we can attribute the deconversion to the trigger. I would say that the trigger is kind of like the needle that pops the balloon. You know, there's a pressure that's building up, and then you have a trigger that gives you permission to sort of release the pressure, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and sorry, I didn't mean to steal your thunder. I was just bringing that up because I was just thinking of Rachel Slick, and I thought that was yeah. So
anyway, she says, quote, "I think the most terrifying thing about losing faith is the not knowing, because I didn't understand that so many people operate under the comfort of saying, I don't know. And it's a very fundamental part of science or study to say, I'm developing this framework, but I don't know about this problem. Under Christianity, all questions had an answer and had to have an answer. And if you said, I don't know about something, it was implied that your position was fallible. And so, transitioning from a completely strong framework where everything was known to an uncertain one, was really bizarre. I had no idea how people operated like that. And I had to figure out how to be comfortable with saying, I don't know. And it made me feel, I think, more unintelligent in an ego sort of way. I feel that I had attached a great deal of personal pride to be able to have answers to questions. And so having to say, I don't know, really humbled me quite a bit. Now, she does a really good job of kind of condensing and explaining this mindset in that quote. Before I discuss it, I'll read another quote. This one comes from, you guys know the Rhett and Link, right?
Yep.
I can't remember his last name, but this is Rhett.
Yeah.
Of Rhett and Link.
Yeah. Oh, I used to know their last names, but
I want to say Neil, but I'm not sure.
No, Neil is Link's real first name.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
It's like right on the tip of my tongue. I'll remember it tonight when I'm trying to get to bed or something.
Sure, yeah. I could look it up right now, but I don't want to, have dead air time while I do that.
Right.
I mean, anyway,
Caleb and I could just tell jokes while you look it up.
Sure. But no. So he says, quote, one of the biggest changes in my life is that I've lost my appetite for certainty, specifically certainty about things I don't think you can be certain about. I think my struggle with Christianity, for me, a big part of it was I had to keep aligning my thoughts and being certain, and keep realigning my faith and being sure about this, and knowing exactly what's going on to happen when I die and all this stuff. But when I was like, I don't think I can be certain about these things. It's like when you stop eating meat, you lose your appetite for meat, a lot of people say. End quote. So again, this kind of illustrates the idea. Now, the best I can possibly think about this is, okay, so you have this sort of Gish-Gallop technique that you get from atheists where they'll be like, well, what about, the creation story? Well, what about this, the lack of evidence for the Exodus? Well, what about the number of angels at the tomb? Well, what about, the errors in the Bible? What about the immorality of Christians? They just kind of throw these things at you, machine gun style. And the idea, the instinct, especially of, a younger Christian or somebody who's not trafficked in apologetics too much, would be to answer every single one of those questions. And if you're uncertain about any of those, that counts as true evidence against Christianity. You have to know all the answers. And if there's any kind of chinks in the armor that you can't answer, there's a hole in the dam, and that's just, releasing the pressure, and eventually it's going to go. So this idea that you have to have all the answers, you have to be certain, and to not be certain is to, admit to the possibility that the whole system is wrong. Kind of a house of cards type thing. That's the best I can possibly get my mind around, because I was in that condition at some point, and occasionally I still am. When somebody throws constant objections, you kind of want to engage every one of those objections, which is kind of a red herring tactic. But at the same time, it's the kind of this instinct that you have, be like, oh, I don't have an answer to that kind of thing. So maybe that's kind of the mindset here, but I don't know. I mean, having heard both of those quotes, which I think are a pretty good summary of this objection, what are your thoughts? Well, let me put it this way. Have either of you guys, can you relate to this idea of total certainty and kind of its necessity to Christianity?
Well, I think, yeah, because I used to be a lot more certain about my faith when I was younger than I am now. And I think part of that is from studying apologetics and studying philosophy, because I've come to realize that, there are things about reality that I can't be certain about. I can't be certain that I'm really sitting here right now. I might be in the Matrix or a brain in the vet, the whole, that whole philosophical problem. So, I can be certain that I exist, I think therefore I am, as long as, I have to exist in order to doubt my own existence. So I can be sure that I exist. I can be sure about the laws of thought. But there are very few things that I can actually have absolute certainty about. Now, I have very high certainty that my faith is true. But the more that I study apologetics and philosophy, the more I've actually come to realize that having doubts and asking questions is actually okay. So I don't I don't hold to the certainty standard anymore like I used to before I actually studied apologetics. So it's actually my apologetic studying and philosophy studying that has actually caused me to become a lot more okay with having doubts and asking questions.
Okay. All right. So you can kind of relate to what is being said here.
Yeah, I mean, I went through a doubting period when I got out of high school. I could have given up on my faith. I went out there, I went out there seriously looking for the answers. I wasn't just using it as an excuse to give my faith away. So I dug as deep as I could, and I managed to find some really good books of philosophy and apologetics, which actually reinforce that our faith is one that is rationally defensible.
Mm. What do you think, Caleb?
Yeah, I was in very much the same boat. I grew up in churches, and I'm looking for a clip I'll hopefully be able to show here in a little bit if I can dig it up. But I grew up in churches that very much touted the idea that doubt and certainty were kind of opposite ends of the spectrum. Doubt was a very bad thing. Oh, you're doubting, you're not reading your Bible enough, or you don't have enough faith. And so I grew up with at least adults, and I'm not going to say the churches, because I don't think the churches I grew up in were entirely that way. But the adults in the church, many of them had this mentality.
Okay.
Luckily, I was not raised with that mentality, and my dad did a good job making the distinctions and letting me know questions were okay.
Mm.
And it was that when I did start having doubts, that was the kind of last piece left hanging there for me. That's like, okay, it's okay to have these questions. If Christianity is true, then it can handle my doubts. If it's not, then I don't need to spend any more time on it. So it was that seed of doubt, if you will, that actually helped preserve my faith through some of the difficult times it went through.
So yeah, I think that I probably might be able to better relate to this, because I'm sure at one point, I think that I recall a point at which I had this idea that you had to be certain, there had to be answers to each of these things, and to not have those answers is a problem. But I recall my dad, made this statement to me that, you guarantee that when you die and you get to heaven, you're going to find out you were wrong about a lot of things, because there's no possible way you could know enough things to be right about everything. And, that's another thing my dad hammered into me, is that, as humans, we're limited in our knowledge. And so therefore there's sort of limitations to what we can know and what we can be certain about, and this kind of philosophy that my dad specifically kind of drilled into me allowed me the capacity to be able to say, I don't know, and to admit to the fact that there are others that had different, views or opinions than mine that could possibly be right, and I could be wrong, and I had to admit to that. And, the ability to say, I don't know, is a tremendous intellectual tool. Because it allows you growth and allows you to consider options, and then as you get into apologists, you hear a lot of debates, right? And you don't hear necessarily just atheist versus Christian. You hear some Christian versus Christian. You hear debates about, say, the nature of the rapture, for instance. That's one, and sort of the, I don't know, various like creationism versus kind of progressive creationism, old earth creationism, whatever that crazy thing that Tyler holds to. You get the idea, and it becomes a point, at least to me, it's becoming a point where it's actually enjoyable to engage in those discussions, to actually consider that there are other options, and to listen, hear out both sides of the issue, and I think that has contributed to my ability to not, to be comfortable not being certain about things. In fact, I actually find it enjoyable to not be certain, because it allows me the intellectual freedom to consider things, and this freedom to consider things intellectually is very enjoyable to me. I like that. I like exploring. I like learning. I like considering positions and hearing both sides of an issue. So I think that if we're, I don't like to hold myself up as the standard, be arrogant like that, but that's at least been helpful for me. So.
Yeah, no, the more I can step inside somebody else's worldview, and the more I can analyze it from an insider's perspective as much as possible in studying actual beliefs and how they came to these beliefs, it's very edifying for my faith. And it was the same thing at one point I did with Christianity is I stepped aside and looked at it as objectively as possible to say, hey, what here should I doubt? And then, do any of these doubts have reasonable solutions to them or not? And I try and do the same thing with every other religion or cult or whatever belief system, worldview, whatever word you want to use, that I investigate. Because, doubt is a very powerful investigative tool.
Yeah. So the reason that I bring this up in the context of the belief thing is it is at least possible that this idea of total certainty is what carries over into the person's atheism post deconversion, that you have to be certain about things in order to know them, otherwise they go into the skeptic bin. There has to be some level of certainty that's impossible to achieve.
Yeah, I would say I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean it's a broad brush to paint atheists with, because I'm not sure what the ratio of deconvert to atheists that have just never been Christian or religious in any aspect is, but there is, I imagine, a significant amount of carryover from the deconverts and the various kind of philosophies that they've formed to affect how atheism presents itself. So that would be something interesting to explore later on.
Yeah, I've also wondered if, in kind of how these two issues relate together, whether or not lacking a belief is a defense mechanism of sorts. So to claim that you're lacking a belief in something, such as God, I wonder if it isn't kind of, and Tyler's probably going to hear this and come after me, but I wonder if it isn't the presuppositionalist form of atheism, in the sense of, and to compare the two is unfair, but it's kind of, to me, it has a similar, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, a similar grounding, if you will.
Yeah, Tyler needs to appear on more of these so that he can be here to defend himself.
And I have more respect for presuppositionalism since I've watched more of Tyler's stuff. It's still not huge, but I can at least respect the position a little bit more than I did previously.
Yeah, I operate off of kind of a synthesis of presuppositionalism and evidentialism because, I think they're both useful. I would say that evidentialism tends to be more useful when applied to people who are already believers, because it gives them kind of a foundation for the things that they believe, and it gives them, if nothing else, a background from which to work as they explore those beliefs. Versus presuppositionalism, I find more helpful, especially when engaging in active conversations with atheists, because first of all, it allows you to, engage with them without having to come up with a list and grounding of every question that they have for Christianity. If I can't explain how Jonah could survive in a whale, I don't have the evidence to support Christianity or some such. Versus presuppositionalism, which allows you to both kind of come to an idea of how do we both ground truth such that we can have this conversation, which is helpful for me. But at any rate, so yeah, I hold as possible that I'm misrepresenting both sides of this issue, both the atheist side of, if I don't believe a thing, how do I communicate that I hold it to be true? What's the, how do I crawl into an atheist mind and figure out what they mean when they say I don't have any beliefs, yet they assert things? So I'm not quite sure where they ground that. I'm assuming that they use knowledge. I know a thing to be true because I have evidence to support that. I can argue it.
Yeah, if they've redefined atheism to mean simply a lack of belief and not a positive disbelief, well, then their atheism is functionally no different than agnosticism. And so it seems like they want to claim atheism while trying to claim they have no more burden of proof than an agnostic does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, and yeah, that's difficult. Well, again, I think that's grounded in the definition that they use for belief, because presumably an agnostic would be able to say that, I don't know, therefore I, hold in reserve the possibility either way, versus an atheist, which would say that to know a thing would be to have evidence for that thing. And since I am not convinced, I have not been convinced via evidence of the existence of God, then I don't know that there is a God. I know that I don't know. I don't have beliefs. Yeah. I don't know.
Do you think, or do either of y'all have an opinion on how Dawkins' scale tries to fix this issue?
Dawkins scale?
Y'all familiar with Dawkins' scale?
No.
Yeah, I've heard of his scale. It's been a while since I've read it over, though.
So
now I'm familiar with it.
Yeah. So essentially, Dawkins' scale, and it may be rather hard to see here. Let me see if I can blow this up a bit more. Essentially, it tries to scale out atheism in such a way that gives a spectrum of atheistic leaning. So you have a strong theist who does not question the existence of God or knows that he exists. 2 would be a de facto theist. I cannot know for certain, but I strongly believe in God. A weak theist is someone who's very uncertain, but is inclined to believe in God. In the middle, you have a pure agnostic, where God's existence and non-existence are exactly equiprobable. You have weak atheist at 5. I do not know whether God exists, but I'm inclined to be skeptical. You have a de facto atheist. I cannot know for certain, but I think that God is very improbable. And then you would have a strong atheist who is 100% sure that there is no God.
I think this has just become such a game of biographical statements about yourself and how where you stand in terms of the issue of God, that definitions have become kind of useless, because any given person you encounter who claims to be an atheist is going to have a different idea of what that means.
It's true, and I think it's borderline a cop-out in many ways, in terms of trying to take your position and then build a term around it, versus just saying, I'm an atheist, I'm an agnostic, I'm a theist, but my certainty is XYZ. I think trying to scale these things too much really degrades the meaning in all the words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, this might just be a symptom of postmodernism, though, because you have this idea in postmodernism that, truth is only true insofar as it affects me personally. And so when somebody tells me that they're a theist, I can accept that they're a theist, but for me personally, God is not a helpful concept and is in many ways a damaging concept. And if you can't convince me, then God doesn't exist because I'm the arbiter of truth in my universe.
Mm. That's a good observation, because I think in the same way you see these definitions stretched and modified so much, I think we've seen the same thing happen with gender definitions at this point.
Yeah.
Things. Right.
And this is why we argue more emotionally than we do factually. And this is, I mean, in a sense, it seems as if people adopt atheism often more as a political position than as a, existential position, simply because their willingness to accept the atheist label is a statement against religion and all of the damage that it incurs. So, in some respects, it may be that many people hold atheism because they, that label to them means against religion. They're anti-religion, and they're anti-religion because of the damage that a religion does.
Right. I mean, to me, it's an issue where when having individual conversations with people over such things, you do have to have these terms defined in conversations with people, because, someone saying they're an atheist may mean many things from, borderline deist to, someone who's rejected all these beliefs. And you really have to clarify in individual conversations versus slapping too wide a label on anything.
Yeah, and this may also be why when you have the argument with the atheist, they're less interested in arguing from a kind of categorical, evidence-based level, and more along the lines of, look at all the damage that religion has caused. Look at all the terrible things that you believe. Look at the, conclusions to which your belief would lead you. And so it's more about the nature of the belief itself than it is about, in terms of evidence. Now, that's not to say they won't bring evidence into the issue, which is how they ground their belief, but they've got, the evidence is kind of sort of peripheral to the belief itself. And this is, Caleb, I'm sure you're familiar with this idea that, we take a position first, then we justify the position, and this is kind of human nature. Oftentimes you'll see, I know Scott Adams really did this, and to an extent, so did Douglas Adams, where they were talking about how hypnotism works. So you put in a suggestion into the person's head, a post-hypnotic suggestion or something you want them to do on stage or whatnot. And then they carry out this suggestion, and then they justify the action that they took. Well, I did this because, and they give a reason for why they did it. Now, they didn't have a reason to do it. It was something that they were told to do. But then they have to, in their mind, justify the action. And so their brain just kind of fills in that vacuum of why did I do that with some kind of constructed reason, but they're certain of this reason. There's a level of certainty. I did that, I definitely did this for this reason. And this is kind of how, a lot of people work. They adopt a position, then they fill the reasons for the position.
Yeah. I don't have any studies or anything to show that, but that is certainly an impression that I get from a lot of people that I interact with. More like they have this, really deep belief, like in my specific field, abortion. They have really strong intuition that abortion is permissible, so they find reasons to try to justify their intuition instead of really examining the evidence in an impartial way.
Yeah.
So
and I mean, this is something to which we're all subject. This is human nature, so it's something you kind of have to be introspectful about a bit as well. But I was talking about this idea of uncertainty when I was a kid, that I realized that you can't assume that you can't be certain in your positions only because we're limited in our knowledge. There might be something I don't know at present that could change my position if I did know it.
Right.
But in that same vein, I realized that you could argue anything. You could adopt any kind of position in the world that, maybe there is an upside down world exactly like ours on the other side of the ground from me, where people are walking around upside down and carrying out life and activities. And then I could come up with reasons why that is so, and you kind of see this with flat earthers.
Yeah, I thought that was China. If you dig down deep enough, you'll come out in China.
Right, and they're upside down. Well, I mean, to a degree, I suppose that's technically true, but they're not like 2 feet below me on the other side of the ground.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but at any rate, you can adopt any single position and then argue that position and give reasons why that position is true. Through confirmation bias and disconfirmation bias and things like that. So this is part of the human nature, and it's also something we're all subject to. So yeah, there you go. Belief is faith, is holding something to be true without evidence, and therefore the only thing we can have is knowledge. I don't know. I can't carry it from there to the atheist position. I don't know what they use in place of belief when holding something to be true. So, and yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure I have an answer for that either.
Mm-hmm.
But we've picked a lot on atheist, if you will.
Yeah.
I'd like to veer down a side road real quick and take it back to, I think, something you'll probably agree is also a very dangerous approach. It sounds like all of us here have had some experience where doubt was at the very least accepted, and then became a tool for development and for exploring things and, being able to get into apologetics.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there are some very dangerous ideas out there right now within many Christian circles that have been prevalent over the years, but continue to come up again and again. And I think they cut that off and probably are some of the things that contribute to some of the deconversion stories that you've researched, because I think without seeing the value in doubt and knowing clearly what faith and belief is versus, the definitions that are kind of given for it by the other side, I think it can be very detrimental to someone's worldview. And I actually encountered a clip this week. I've been looking for it part of the show because, it fit perfectly into our conversation here. It's from a very popular pastor who runs a very large church, and so we're gonna give this a watch, and I think it very much exemplifies what we're talking about here in terms of dangerous Christian certainty in a way.
Okay.
So let me see if I can get this up here. Y'all are gonna love this. I think I've got it, so it will play pretty good for us here. All right. So, before I throw this up here, anybody want to take a guess at which pastor this is?
Rob Bell?
Not quite.
Joel Osteen?
Not quite. All right. Good guesses, though. Good guesses.
Is he a real pastor, or?
He claims to be.
Okay, I was going to say Kenneth Copeland. Oh, okay, because Copeland's been kind of in the news a little while. But yeah.
He's been in the news a good bit as well. But yeah, this is Stephen Furtick from Elevation.
I forgot he was
Church.
a thing.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. So video seems to be good. Let's play this. I'll probably pause about halfway through because
he looks like a contemporary worship leader.
He does. What's the next step beyond like contemporary worship leader? Is there like is that like the youth pastor, or would the worship leader be a step up from that?
Maybe youth pastor. I think youth pastor would probably be a step up. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So listen in. I want to hear you guys' thoughts on this. Oh,
I'm sorry, I don't read lips.
I should unmute it. That might help.
Faith is meant to be more than a formality. Can I preach this? Faith is meant to be more than a feeling. Faith is meant to be more than a formula. In fact, if you can reduce it to a formula and make sense out of it, it ain't faith. If you can explain it, it ain't faith. You don't need faith for what you can explain. You need faith for what your eyes can't perceive. You need faith for what you don't understand. Richard Rohr has a definition.
Before we continue on, just to address who Richard Rohr is anybody familiar with him?
Nope.
So Richard Rohr is a author who is a Christian universalist. A lot of his teachings, and I'll use Christian kind of lightly here because his teachings veer extremely into New Age and New Thought teachings. He is a big proponent of the Enneagram, which is something we could probably do a whole nother episode on.
Is that upside down star that's like, the Satan symbol or the witchcraft?
Not quite. It's more of like I think it's like 9-pointed. I guess that'd be a Ninagon, or it's kind of got the same shape as a pentagram, but just a bunch more points. And essentially it's touted as a personality test, the personality test to end all personality test. So people will say, well, I'm a number 2 and that's why I'm the way I am, or you must be a number 3 because you act this way.
Such a zodiac.
Essentially that's exactly what it is. There have been some studies done. The reliability of this thing is extremely low, so it does not hold up as a reliable scientific measure for personality traits. And essentially all of the traits thrown out on the points of this thing, anybody could have certain elements of them the same way a horoscope works, in that, they throw out just enough general information that, oh yeah, I could relate to that. So, and it's become big in Christian circles, even in some reasonably fundamentalist churches, the Enneagram has become a relatively big thing. I've got some stories to share if we ever do a full episode on it, that just where it's popped up and kind of those sort of things.
Yeah, one of the members in the CAA, I'm trying to remember her name. I usually remember it when I'm on Facebook, but now that I'm away from Facebook, it's like I'm totally blanking on her name. But she deals with a lot of New Age beliefs and has dealt with the Enneagram too. So, it might be worth seeing if she'd come on and talk about it if we do a show on it.
Marcia Montenegro, right?
Yes, that's her, right?
Yeah, this video I'd actually originally seen on her Christian Answers for the New Age Facebook page. So she definitely addresses it a lot. Jay Mindenwalt has also done a couple articles specifically addressing the psychological reliability of this thing. So those are some great resources if you're big into the Enneagram and want to kind of see why we have objections to it, or why I have objections to it. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I've heard the Enneagram mentioned quite a bit. I have absolutely no idea what it is or what it's supposed to do. So,
yeah, and Richard Rohr, essentially all this is to say that Richard Rohr is one of the ones who's really kind of taken that idea of the Enneagram and drug it into kind of Christian circles. And they claim it was an ancient tool, and
Stephen Furtick's beard kind of looks like a pipe. I just wanted to mention that real quick.
That may be the most amusing thing about this video.
Right.
So Richard Rohr is kind of the proponent who's written some books on this and kind of brought it into a lot of Christian circles. And the claim, of course, is that it's this ancient tool that Christians have used for centuries and all this. It actually has some occult origins if you look into it. But let us continue and hear Rohr's definition of faith, which Furtick is quoting here.
Of faith, he says that faith is patience with mystery. Faith is the willingness to abide in a place that you don't fully understand the ramifications of. Faith is patience with mystery. What is faith? Hebrews 11:1 says that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Faith, the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Let's play a game. What's the opposite of good? What's the opposite of light? What's the opposite of faith? I heard doubt. I heard fear. I want to suggest a third option. What if faith is not? What if faith, you tend to think sometimes that if you have doubts, you don't have faith, that the presence of doubt indicates the absence of faith. But one priest said the opposite of faith is not doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty.
Thoughts so far? Hold on, I've got to throw up. I'll be right back.
Well, yeah, there's clearly some issues here. I mean, aside from the fact that that there are very few things that I would say I have absolute certainty in, but I'm reasonably confident, fairly certain that when I step on an airplane, the pilot is going to get me from point A to point B safely. So I would say that I have faith in that pilot's ability to get me there. I can be fairly certain that he'll get me there safely, and I would still be placing faith in the pilot to get me there.
Yeah, I mean, the argument is that faith means trust. So, and trust insofar as you're willing to allow the individual or item to do those things that you expect it to do based on, whatever reasons that you expect it to do that. In terms of, well, okay, let's talk about Hebrews for a second. Hebrews 11 is in a larger context. And people, they jump onto Hebrews 11:1 and, leave it at there. In the book of Hebrews, he's dealing with a church that's undergoing persecution, as churches do. And, he's giving them, he's arguing that they have a reason to endure the persecution. And then he does the, faith is a substance of things hoped for, etc. And then the rest of the chapter, he's talking about, he's giving a survey of the Old Testament, specifically individuals within the Old Testament that had a close relationship with God, Moses and Noah and Abraham and so on and so forth. And the argument he's making is that each of these individuals underwent some kind of hardship, but in the end, something came from it that was important. And honestly, I mean, the argument he's making there is that the importance of what came for it was more of a kind of an eternal importance. They became part of the story of God, kind of this meta narrative of Scripture that led to Christ and his outworking. And so the argument he appears to be making to this church is that, whatever they're undergoing here is part of a larger narrative. And it's the same narrative that Abraham participated in when he was told by God that he would have a son and waited for decades for that promise to come true. And it's part of the same narrative that Noah participated in when he built the ark with no evidence that XYZ is going to happen, etc. So, I mean, it's a fairly deep theological point, but he starts with it by saying that faith, is this trust in a God, and I'm going to give you evidence now that God is trustworthy based on these stories. Obviously, that's not going to be convincing to any skeptic because they don't believe any of those stories anyway. And perhaps they're not interested in participating in a meta-narrative that points to Christ or God, considering that is putting themselves subject to a egotistical, patriarchal, megalomaniacal character, fictional character, etc., etc. So, no, it's not a great passage for a skeptic, but at least it's making a different argument than just this idea of belief without evidence.
Right. And I think what's most frustrating to me about this is the fact that he takes all this in some kind of attempt at poetic word salad and shuffles these terms up in a way that may confuse people, but more so than that, it doesn't lay out a biblical definition of faith.
Yeah, I'm not sure what he was getting at with all of that talk. What was the point he was coming to?
Well, let's finish the clip. I think he does, just to give it a little more context here. I think it does go a little deeper. Y'all wanna finish this?
Sure.
All right.
Let that sink in. When you've figured everything out, when you put your life in such a position that you don't attempt anything that requires God, you don't stretch yourself into a territory that enables the faith that you need for the challenges that you face. So that means you can have a lot of doubts, but still operate in faith, because faith is not certainty and faith is not a feeling. I don't have to feel faith to have faith. I don't have to feel a goosebump to believe God. I don't even have to feel happy to be grateful for what God is doing in my life. Somebody shout, I got faith. I got faith in the middle of a storm. My faith doesn't mean it's not going to rain. My faith means I'm going to make it to the other side through whatever waves I have to cross over. I got a faith that works. It works in the face of the wind and the waves. It works in the face of doubt and disappointment. My faith is a faith that works.
That clarify for you at all, Joe?
So, I mean, to sum up the point he's trying to make, I think, is that, I mean, we're going through various things in life, but, we've got faith, which, is this reliance that we don't have to feel in order to have it. And God is going to get us through the storm or some such. It appears to, that would be my guess based on what I heard as to the point that he's trying to come to here. And again, I mean, he's presenting it in sort of this charismatic, preachy kind of way that's intended, I suppose, to kind of give this vague sense of inspiration to the audience, which is why they come there anyway. So I'm sure that's accomplishing that purpose. Now, having said that, I think that you could argue this is the same, general point that Hebrews 11 is making, is that, there is this, if faith is what gets us through this trial. But the difference I would make between the two is what I was saying before. In Hebrews 11, it's talking about people who died for, because of their trust in God or so forth. They underwent some things they didn't come out the other side of. He's talking about these prophets that were sawed in half or persecuted and so forth. And so he's not making a promise to the church that God is going to get them through the storm or whatnot. The promise he's making is that they're participating in this larger narrative. And so that is the distinction I would make here, is that oftentimes you hear this kind of inspirational message with the focus being me and what God is doing for me. And that is not the focus that Hebrews 11 is making. The focus of Hebrews 11 is there is a larger story here that points to God and to Christ, and I am a participant in that story. And sometimes that participation includes suffering, but I may become one of those of whom the world was not worthy by participating in this larger story that points to God. In other words, it's about God, it's not about me. But I might have the privilege of participating in this larger story that's about God, And so, it's a very different point being made there. One is God's going to do this for me. The other is I am doing this and participating in the eternal story that defines who God is. So.
Yeah, and I personally, for me, I think it's a problem with definitions there. While he mentions doubt a couple of times as not being the opposite of faith, so it's almost this endorsement of doubt, but then it takes it and applies certainty on the other side of this. So having certainty, or the closer you get to certainty, the further you are from faith. In the same way as people who discourage doubts, it's doing the same thing in his application of words here, in that he's saying that certainty is, you don't have faith if you have certainty, or the closer you get to that, very much the same way a skeptic is going to argue that, you can't be certain of this belief, and it's not good to be certain of this belief. He's arguing, I think, the same thing here from a reverse perspective, that in an essence, doubt is not bad, but the exploration of doubt is something that leads you away from God, versus a blind faith, if you will.
Yeah, it seems like he is making an argument for blind faith to a degree. He said that the opposite of faith is certainty, which indicates to me that he is discouraging this idea of, well, let's try to get more evidence. Let's try to have belief based in, certainty or whatnot, which would be kind of the atheist definition of faith. At least it seems to be related in some way. Clinton?
Yeah, I was just going to say that it sounds like what might be going on is that he may be confusing defining something with describing it. Like he's acting like Hebrews 11:1 defines faith, when instead what's actually going on is Paul is just describing it, saying that our faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, where he's not really...
Oh, you think you're one of those who thinks Paul wrote Hebrews?
Oh, yeah, actually, I should maybe preface that. No, I don't have a firm belief. I said Paul because I just wasn't paying close enough attention to what I was saying. The author of Hebrews, I should say. I'm open to the possibility that Paul wrote it, but I'm also open to the possibility that he didn't.
Okay.
Considering that Paul wrote Hebrews, I think sorry. Considering that Paul, yeah, I'm tied up on my words now. Considering that Paul wrote Romans, I could absolutely see him writing something like Hebrews. But I think there's good reason to believe that, to kind of challenge Paul's authorship of Hebrews. So yeah, so just substitute Paul with the author of Hebrews, as far as Hebrews 11:1 goes.
I was just joshing you. You can continue your point.
You're busting my chops.
Yeah,
and that's basically all I was going to say. I think a number of Christians do this too. They take this blind faith approach, and then they'll say, well, yeah, Hebrews 11:1 says faith is the evidence of, or the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So clearly it's not, it doesn't, evidence has nothing to do with it. But I think that they're just confusing defining something with describing it. I think what the author there is doing is describing faith, giving one aspect of faith rather than actually defining what faith is.
All right. Yeah. Caleb, what were your thoughts on that?
No, I mean, aside from the frustration over what I see as a borderline dangerous teaching, for that reason, that we're taking definitions into places that lead to an application here that is completely unbiblical in terms of the actual biblical definition of faith and how we really see that used throughout the scriptures. It encourages this application based on, Richard Rohr and Furtick's definition of faith versus taking a look at what faith actually is in the Bible. So, that's my main frustration with it. And I think that, again, that pushing away from skeptical investigation of things is actually kind of, the other side of the spectrum of the hyper skepticalism we looked at kind of in the atheist approach to things tonight, in terms of how they want to define things and take this hyper skeptical approach. I think on the other side of the spectrum, you have this kind of thing that is all too popular in many churches that pushes so far against that, in terms of taking a blind faith approach to things, that it's no wonder we have so much misunderstanding between atheists and Christians when we're not sitting down, defining things and understanding how someone else sees something, and finding definitions we agree on, before arguing or discussing things that, actually matter. We jump right into those things versus defining the terms we're using, when often they're on completely opposite sides of the spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah, we talk past each other quite a bit in society and in the church. We use similar vocabulary meaning completely different things. And, in terms of atheism, I think we do that as well. We will talk to an atheist, and when I say I believe something, they hear something completely different. And the same thing is true of their definition. I don't know if I was mentioning this on air or off, but I heard this debate recently between Tyler and an atheist whose name I can't recall. It was launched on our premium podcast. So those who listen to the premium podcast, that was last week's episode. And the whole debate was over the definition of atheism. And the reason that was the debate, it was they couldn't settle on a mutual definition of atheism in order to determine a topic. So the definition of atheism became the topic. They couldn't argue about anything else because they were too busy arguing about the definition of atheism.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've got to start somewhere and, you have to flesh that out first, then
Yeah.
maybe that's not a bad place to start.
To a degree, that kind of does what they accuse the ontological argument of doing, define God into existence. Well, the definition of atheism kind of defines God out of existence.
That's true.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
So, well, that was all I had. Any parting words, fellas?
Well, over here, Dunkin Atheism was saying Tyler Vela versus Eric Murphy.
Oh, okay. Yeah. There we go. That was who it was, Eric Murphy.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
All right, let's see. We do have a few other comments here.
Thank you for joining us, Dunkin Atheism.
Yeah, thank you. Here's another comment as well. Or let me start with the first comment here. Atheism claims not to believe in God because of no good reason. However, without acknowledging God's self-disclosure, the atheist will be left with only brute facts, which by definition are without reason.
Yeah, I mean, when I hear these debate, it ultimately kind of dissolves into tautologies, where, it is because it is. And as a human being with limited knowledge, occasionally I think, especially when I was exploring this as a teenager, that in order to know anything, you would have to know everything, because a fact is defined by its relationship to all other surrounding facts. And all other surrounding facts are defined by their relationship to the facts that surround them. So at a certain point, you would have to know everything in order to know anything. And therefore, only a being that can know everything has true knowledge. Clinton, you're the philosopher. Am I the only one who said that thought?
I'm sorry. Could you repeat the thought? I'm not sure I was very clear on it.
Okay, let's say you have a dictionary definition, right? You've got a word, and there are a couple of sentences following that word defining what the word is. Well, in order to understand those sentences, you'd have to understand every word in those sentences. So you could flip to those entries in the dictionary and read the words following those words. But of course, in order to understand those words, you'd have to, in order to understand that definition, you'd have to understand those words. And so it just becomes this sort of infinite regress that in order to understand anything, you'd have to understand everything, because a fact is defined by all the surrounding facts that it relates to. And those facts are defined by their surrounding facts, etc., in an infinite regress, and to the point where you'd have to have all knowledge to have any knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've had that thought before. I have heard some, I'm not an academic philosopher, but I have heard some philosophers pontificate on the circularity of language, how you have to, have knowledge of a language before you can understand certain definitions. You have to have knowledge of those words, those definitions. So I have heard them talk about that too. So, yeah.
Yeah, we did a whole episode on language.
Yeah, true.
Dunkin Atheism chimed in again and said that you can be the recipient of an omniscient God who grants us to know some things. So you don't need to be omniscient.
Yeah. It's interesting because in terms of language, from a behaviorist perspective, they wouldn't even consider language in behaviorism, it's study of pure cause and effect. I do X, X happens, therefore I respond by Y, and so we can see what causes what's behavior in me. And anything that would describe sort of a ethereal realm of thought, or meaning is pointless, because those are things we cannot observe. And so that's what they call mentalism. When all others of areas of psychology are mentalism, it comes up with these helpful fictions that construct ideas of, things that exist outside of the observable world. And so, there's no way to observe them. There's no way to be sure of them. And so when that strays into the area of language, they have to come up with an idea of why I say the things I say if language is observed as a behavior and not something more meaningful than just rote behavior. And so I was studying that, and it causes your head to ache. There's quite a bit going on in there.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
Yeah. So just to wrap up that thought, Duncan chimed in again and said, so it is false to claim you would have to be omniscient in order to know something. Tagging in from his previous comments of being the recipient of an omniscient God. So,
yeah, no, and I don't actually hold that you can't know anything unless you know everything. I would just have to come up with some way in which to ground knowledge, that doesn't involve having all knowledge.
Right.
And so that's where we get into epistemological discussions. For example, I'm what would be considered a foundationalist, in that I believe that there are certain foundational beliefs that you can start from that don't have to be proven, but they can still count as knowledge. You can't necessarily have certainty about them, but you have to start somewhere in order for you to be able to know anything. Otherwise, you do have to be hyper skeptical and believe that you can't know anything if you don't have some foundations that you can start from. So Roderick Chisholm wrote an influential paper about this kind of thing in epistemology. And so foundationalism is kind of the view that I hold. The other one is what might be called methodism, in which you have to have a method to be able to know something. But the problem is that kind of idea can be essentially it's circular, because in order to have a method to know something, well, you have to have a method to know that method to know something, off on into infinity. So so I take the foundationalist view that there are certain foundations that we can start from that can be assumed. It's not circular like Tyler would say, but they're foundational beliefs that you can start from and that you're safe assuming in order to be able to build a knowledge from.
Yeah. All right.
Well,
anything else in our chats that we can respond to, or are we good?
Dunkin Atheism was the main contributor tonight, so thank you for being out there, engaging us some. We love engaging with viewers, so
All right.
show up next time for one of our live shows and interact with us, and we'll call you out on the broadcast.
Yeah, typically we're doing these Friday, Saturday, or Sunday nights, and we'll always post on our Facebook page prior to launching into one. So if you follow us on Facebook, you'll get the update. We all live in different areas of the country and are on different schedules and so forth. So these things are thrown together progressively up to the minute that they launch.
Right.
So we can't give you the schedule far ahead of time. Just kind of keep up to date on our Facebook page, and we'll do our best. Of course, everything that we're doing is going to go out again as the podcast. So if you're a podcast listener, you can catch us there. And of course, it's on YouTube after this point, so you can watch the show at any point. But obviously, the ability to interact with our audience gives us a better grounds of discussion, and you can jump in as the fourth chair in this discussion because we're going to include you.
Yeah.
All right. Give me the go-ahead, Caleb.
All right, go ahead and close us out.
Okay, well, you've been listening to The Mentionables, and if you like us, I've already said follow us on Facebook. We also have a Twitter feed, and we have a premium podcast, which I talk of often, and you can become a Patreon for $5 a month. You get access to the premium podcast, which launches weekly, as opposed to these shows, which are hit or miss. Currently, we're doing debates on the premium podcast. I'm airing debates that various members of the Mentionables have participated in. And of course, you'd get access to the backlog, which includes the audio version of both my book and the Mentionables signature project, the Mentionable Project. And I didn't just stutter there. It is actually called The Mentionable Project. It's available on Amazon. So, having said all of that, you can visit us on thementionables.org. So keep on listening and keep on mentioning.